So hey, in this video we'll be looking into the a method of Promise.race called Promise.race. So what actually Promise.race is? So in the documentation it is written that a method that takes an iterable of promises as input and returns a single. So the return promise settles an eventual state and the first promise that gets settles. So what it actually means is, I, so let's say uh, in some cases you want just the output, or you can just the response and uh, which resolves the first at first, right? So let's say, oh yeah, so that's the response which resolves at first, and you don't actually care about the responses. So let's say uh, it can be any API. So whichever API is actually giving you I mean, whichever the promise gets actually resolved first, you will get the output. So you don't care if the response is rejecting, or maybe it may be well. I mean, the promise.res actually doesn't give you the give doesn't gives you doesn't gives you the you can say mm, feature feature of just taking the promises that gets that got resolved. It doesn't matter if the response actually resolved or rejected, but it will give you the response to whichever the response actually, uh, I mean, resolves at the first, at the first place. Right. So let's just take an example. I'll just take the example of the documentation itself, so that it will be easy. So let's say this is my code, and in this you can see there are two promises, the promise one and promise two, and I have used a promise.race, and then in the array I have put promise one and promise two. So if you see in the definition itself, it actually takes that iterable. So you have to store these promises in the form of iterable. I mean, it is array, right? So it can iterate through the array. So now what happens is, uh, now you can see that the first promise actually gets resolved after the 500, right? After the 500 ms. But here the promise 2 actually resolves after 100 ms, isn't it? So now promise 2 will be getting resolved faster, isn't it? So now you will get the output, you will get 2 in the output, right? Because the promise 2, if the promise 2 is getting resolved first, it will just give you the output, isn't it? So here you are getting 2, right? So yeah, so let's say, yeah, iterable, you have to give the promises in the form of some iterable data structure. So iterable such as an array, yeah. So such as an array of promises. So you would see here, it actually tells you it fulfills if the first promise to settle is fulfilled, and rejects if the first promise to settle is rejected. The return promise remains pending forever if the iterable past is empty, if the iterable past is non-empty but it contains no pending promises. Okay, so let's say what this line actually means. Let's say I want const data equal to promise.res, and let's say I don't give any object. Okay, so I don't give anything in the promise. So let's say, yeah, so let's say I don't want to return anything, and what I will do is I'll just log the data. Now if you see here, it will give you a pending state, which is, I mean, it will never get resolved. Okay, it will never be resolved. It will be always in the pending state because you haven't gave any promises in the iterable, right? But let's say if I give the promise one and promise to, then what will happen is it will tell you that it is fulfilled and your promise is getting fulfilled, right? So this is the I mean kind of like a edge case or something, but yeah, this is what this line actually means. But let's say past a non-empty contains a no pending promises, the return promise is still asynchronously settled. So let's say description, the method is not the first access more conflict, but don't, yeah. So let's say the method is used it is useful when you want the first async task to complete, but do not care about the eventual state. So actually, if you don't want to look into the whatever the state of the API is, but you just want first promise, you need your code to give the first to resolve promise, then you can just simply use the race. Okay, so it is just a race. I mean, isn't it? I mean, in the name itself, it is telling that okay, it is a race between the promises. Whichever the promise actually wins the race, it will give you the output, and rest will be rejected. So that is it is either succeed or fail, right? So if the iterable more than one promises and already settled promises, then promise will settle the first found in the iterable, right? So if all the promises are already settled, then it will give you the first promise that actually get resolved at the first place. So it actually I mean deals with the time. So these are the examples, you can look into it. But there is one thing that I want to like it is also mentioned in the documentation itself. If you scroll down, the difference between uh difference between so the difference between the Promise.any and Promise.race. So if you have learned about the Promise.any, so you'd know that Promise.any actually gives you the promise that actually resolves, right? I mean, whichever the promise resolves, it will give you the response. I mean, it will give you the, so if the, let's say, there is a very beautiful example. I will just give you that only, explain with that only. So let's say this is the race code. I will just copy this, and what I will do is I will just paste this here, and so this is the same, kind of like a same example. This thing and the in the dot. Then so here, what I have done is, uh, now in the promise to, I have given the it has rejected. Okay, it will reject in the 100 seconds. So now promise dot in the promise dot any, I mean the in the promise dot trace, it is 100. So this will get executed first, right? Because it has less time, but it will still be rejected. But the thing is, so if it got so rejected, so it won't be in the then block, right? It will directly go to catch block, and it will just console you the with the error console dot error, right? So what the example is saying, that let's say you have the so it will get rejected. So usually what you will think, okay, it got rejected, but maybe my promise dot erase will only give me the promise that will be resolved. But it actually doesn't happen. If you look into the output, it will give you the fail with no reason. So promise dot raise actually doesn't think about the if it got resolved or if it got rejected. It will actually see the time. That's it. For promise dot rate, it doesn't know what the response is. If it's a 200 response or maybe 400, it doesn't matter. If it's a reject or I mean resolve for promise dot race, it doesn't matter. So the yeah, so only promise one is fulfilled, but promise two is faster. So it will only depend only matter that whichever the promise gets faster, right? So even if it's a dot, if in even if it's a rejected promise, then also it will go to the catch block, and it will get executed. But the thing is, what happens is if you use any here in place of race. So what this will do is this for any, it won't matter. I mean the time doesn't matter. it will always look for the response that get resolved. It will always look for the response that will actually be resolved. For this, it doesn't, the speed doesn't matter here. Even if it takes 500 seconds, but I mean 500 ms, but still it will only take this promise one as its output, and it will directly go to the 10 block. Now if you see the output, you would get the succeeded with value one, right? So this one is the output, isn't it? So yeah, so So for basically the dot, promise.any, it will actually matter whichever the promise actually at the top. Okay, it's just like the JavaScript, how we, I mean, the JavaScript actually looks line by line. The code, it actually reads the code line by line. So it will just, so let's say I have a promise tree, and then let's say new promise. I'll just copy this rather than just this. No, not the rejected one. I just control C, control V, and then promise tree. And here I will just promise tree. So let's say, so I have just created a promise tree and then put it in my iterable array. Now, if you look into the output, you will still get the one, the first response, because it got resolved at the, it was on the top and in the call stack. So it will be directly executed in my in my one, right? But the thing is, let's say, even if let's say if I have this at the top of the promise tree, in the promise one, then you will see, okay, fine. So now if you see, I'll get the tree, right? But even if you give it here, let's say I'm giving promise tree, and then I'm just deleting this. So it actually won't matter. Okay, let's say I have given it in tree, but I will put this promise tree at the bottom. Yeah, at the bottom, but you would see that I'm getting one, right? So so for JavaScript, it will just matter that whichever comes into the call stack and the callback queue, that will only be will only get executed first, right? So yeah, this was it was actually mentioned in the documentation. So promise direction, it actually take the first fulfill. It will only take the first fulfill promise. So yeah, succeed value one. So yeah, this was all about the promise.race and the difference between promise.any and promise.race. So